Hello team, welcome back to my CISA exam review series, and today we're going to cover the second part of the domain, which is called as an execution. That's why I said 1.2. The name of the domain is Information Systems Auditing Process. My name is Prab Nair, and for more information you can refer my LinkedIn profile. So let's start. So first part in the execution is the audit project management. Now audit is basically considered as a project only because it has a start date and it has an end date. If I'm starting any kind of an audit in January, I have to finish in a particular time frame. Like example, I need to finish that audit in February. You go for ISO audits, it's basically take 10 weeks. If you go for an internal audit, it basically take 4 to 5 weeks. Every audit basically have a billings where we do the billing based on the man hours per day per hours. That is why every audit we need to consider as a project. And that is why in order to execute the project, the first most important thing is basically required the educate planning. So educate planning is the necessary first step in performing an effective IS audit. Okay. And to efficiently use IS audit resources, which is called as information system audit resources, the audit organization must assess the overall risk for the general and application areas and related services which been audited, and develop an audit program that consists of the objectives and audit procedures. That is why we have a next thing here is audit objectives. So audit objectives. See, if I'm doing an audit of ISO 27001, my objective is to certify the organization. I'm doing an audit which is an internal audit which is called as a change management audit. Example, I'm doing a change management audit. My primary objective, it's my internal audit. My objective is to see the control effectiveness. I want to check whether things are working as per the senior management requirement. So objectives are basically varies depending upon the requirement of an audit. So audit objectives is basically all about focus on confirming the internal control which is exists to minimize the business risk and they function as expected. If you ask me the overall audit objective we have. So one of the primary purpose of an IS audit is to identify the control objectives. Okay, control objectives. That is the first thing. And the second is basically control effectiveness. If you ask me as an internal auditor, we basically does the audit of an organization to see the control effectiveness only and give the assurance to the senior management things are working as per the requirement. See, senior management has appointed me to see whether things are working as per the requirement. I will do the audit based on their defined SOP. So I'm doing an audit of the change management. First thing I will ask the SOP, that is the control. Whatever they address in the control, I will see whether they are meeting those objectives or not. Example is, as per change management, all the RFC need to go through a 3 layer of checks. So I will validate whether all the RFC is going through 3 way of checks. This is how we basically checking whether control objective has been met or not. So that is basically called as a control objective or audit objectives. Second is basically called as a audit phases. It's very important for us to understand that every audit basically has a phases. We split the entire activity in the phases. Each phase in the execution of an audit can be divided into a key steps. The first thing is basically called as a plan. The first step is called as a plan. The second step is basically called as a plan. The second is basically called as a define. The third step is basically called as a perform. And fourth step is basically results. So summary is your audit phases are basically split into 4 phases: planning, define, perform, and report the results. So in order to define these audit phases in detail, we have a next thing which is called as an audit program. Okay. So what is basically the audit program? So audit program is basically a step-by-step set of audit procedures and instructions that should be performed to complete an audit. So phases are the high level activities, you can say, where the audit programs are the detailed step-by-step process. Example, like you came to me for the training. Your objective was to clear the exam. I explain you the entire phases. You will enroll in my training. You complete the training. You have to complete the questions and then you have to go for the exam. But the thing is that when you attend my training, there will be some detailed training program we have. Like domain 1, we're going to cover in this, domain 2, we're going to cover this. Once you complete the training, then we have a detailed questionnaire. So audit program is all about the training program. I'm just giving an example here. So audit program is a step-by-step set of audit procedures and instructions that should be performed to complete an audit. The main purpose of developing an audit program is to accomplish several things. Example, formal documentations and the sequential steps. Creation of a procedures that are repeatable and easy to use. If you have established program tomorrow, if I left the organization, someone else is there who can follow those documentations, and according to that, he can drive the audits. Documentation of a different type of a testing that can be used. Example like compliance testing and substantive testing, and meeting the generally accepted audit standards that relate to the planning phase in the audit process. So that is the main purpose of developing an audit program. It also brings some kind of a uniformity. Okay, team. It also brings some kind of a uniformity. So when you're talking about uniformity, suppose this year I'm involved in the change management audit, and next year I'm involved in the patch management audit. So next there's a new auditor who came, and now he's going to audit the change management. So I want to bring a uniformity. So he will basically follow the common audit program where we have a step-by-step process. In this duration, we need to release the first document, which is called as a audit memorandum letter to the auditee. Then there will be a field works. Then there is an audit report need to be submitted in this format. This will be the template. So that is covered in the audit program. So when talking about the audit program is further divided into 3 activities. One is called as a planning, fieldwork, and reporting. Now suppose you are an auditee. I basically send the first document, which is called as an APM. That is basically part of my planning. Once you approve this particular audit, I will schedule the meeting in which I will basically gather more information. That is basically called as a field work. And last, I will consolidate everything and document in the report and present to you. Take your conformity on that, and then I will release the final audit report to the stakeholders. So this is basically called as a planning, field work, and reporting. Audit work papers. See, all audit plans, programs, activity, test, findings, incident, all need to be documented. See, a good auditor is the one who maintains the documentation. If I'm challenging you that your process are ineffective, I should have a evidence with me, and that is basically called as a work paper. If I did the audit for 30 days, I need to have a work papers. If I don't have a work papers, I don't have a document for that, I cannot able to justify my governance functions. I cannot able to justify my functions. So our activities, our auditor activities completely depending upon the documentation. So it is very important to maintain all the documentations. And second thing is that every documentation must have a timestamp. Okay, every document must have a timestamp. So another thing which is required in the audit work paper is called as a work paper is considered as a bridge or interface between the audit objective and final report. This is my objective and this is the report. Between the bridge, we have a work paper that basically justify whether this report meet the audit objective or not. Okay, our objective was to see whether we are fully compliant with 27001. My report can say, yes, 70% we are compliance. Can you justify me this 70%? Yes, we have a work paper for that. So this is how between the report and between the audit objective, we have a bridge. Okay. Another important thing which is basically there in the audit project management is called as a fraud and irregularities and illegal acts. See, sometimes what happens, some kind of fraud is also possible in the audit. So management is primarily responsible for establishing, implementing, and maintaining an internal control system that lead to deterrence and timely detection of the fraud. So those kind of activities, we can able to discover the frauds and everything. That is part of the audit project management. So summary is very simple. First, we have a audit objectives. Set the objectives. What is your objectives? Second, define the phases. Plan, define, form results. Detail step-by-step process. How you're going to drive the audit. Where I will send the first invitations that are we going to drive this audit, which is called as a APM. Then in the field work, I will collect the documents and I will prepare the reports. Justify any kind of issues driven by the audit work papers only. All kind of activity need to be documented. For a fraud, irregular, illegal acts in the organization, we have internal control monitoring. Mostly it is driven by the internal audit only, which is a third line of defense. So audit is a project only. Consider as a project which has a start and ending task. And we need we need to represent audit as a project only because it comes with the billing, proper resource management, And we first prioritize what are the critical risks we have in the business process, and according to that, we basically build this particular project. The next topic that we have is called as a sampling. I have seen a couple of folks who always get confused with the sampling. Okay, so sampling is basically performed when time and cost considerations precludes a total verification of all transactions or event in a predefined population. If you go by the standard definition, I want to give one live example of a sampling. Okay, now we have a cake 1, now we have a cake 2, we have a cake 3, we have a cake 4, we have a cake 5. Now these cakes are basically having a different flavors and all that. Now it is not possible for me to eat all the cakes on the same time and able to judge the quality. So what I'm going to do is I will take a one piece of the cake, 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 one piece of the cake. It is just like a 5% or 10%. I will basically going to eat that portion of the cake, and based on that I will decide what is the quality of a cake 1, cake 2, cake 3, cake 4, cake 5. Now why I have to go for a small piece of cake? Because it's not possible for me to eat everything. If I'm hungry, I will eat. That is a different story. If it's a chicken biryani or mutton biryani, something like that, or dal makhni or paneer makhni, I will definitely eat all the 5 dishes. But it is something which cannot be eaten at the same time, the 5 to 7 flavors. So what I did, I basically take a small piece of that particular cake, and then based on that I decide the entire quality of a cake. So now understood? So one small piece of cake will decide the quality of the entire cake. So that entire cake is a population, and from the population we basically pick the samples. I believe this is one of the easiest way I can explain you about the sampling. So taking a piece of cake and then decide the taste of cake is basically called as a sampling. So testing is done on the less than 100% of the transaction. Okay, so testing is basically done on less than 100% of the transaction, and based on that we're forming the conclusions on the entire population. One more example I can give you, as it is an era of COVID-19, there are several people are getting tested on a COVID-19. In some countries they basically driving the entire testing on the population. Now it is not possible for them to test each and every person in the country, so they decided one person from one house. Okay, from the 1,000 they basically pick 10, and based on that they decide, okay, these 1,000 people, how many we have a COVID-19 patients, and based on that they present their opinions. That is another example. Here also they want to check they want to know that, okay, what is the favorite television they have, what is the favorite star they have. So they, from the 12 people of the population, they have picked only 4, and based on their opinion they decided, okay, this particular show is a favorite show in this particular country. Mostly we do sampling in the election campaigns also. You know, before any kind of a pre-election, we do some kind of a polling and all that. They do sampling there also. Out of 100, they will take 10 people, and based on the 10 people, they will basically decide the opinion. But if you take only one person from the 100 and based on that decide the opinion, that is not effective. So that is why the total population of a size must be known as well, since you want to know what percentage or the proportion of your overall population is represented by your sample. Once again, the larger proportions mean the certainty and larger sample size. I repeat again, the total population size must be known as well, as since you want to know what percentage or the proportions of your overall population is represented by your sample. Once again, the larger proportions mean certainty and large sample size. So more you collect, more predictability you can able to gather, more effectiveness will be there. You can able to present opinions more effectively. So we have a different kind of a sampling here. So we have a two type of sampling. One is basically called as a statistical sampling, and one is called as a non-statistical sampling. Statistical sampling is, example, we follow a particular process there. Okay, we have a 10,000 population, from which in every 100 I will basically pick one. Okay, in every 100 I will basically pick one. It means in total over 1,000, if 900 basically have that particular issue, based on that we present the opinion. So everything is based on the numbers. So I, as auditor, quantitatively decide how closely the sample should represent the population, and the number of times in 100 that sample should represent the population. I repeat again, I, as auditor, quantitatively decide how closely the sample should represent the population, and number of times in 1000 that sample should represent the population. So I'm going with the numbers. With a non-statistical sampling mean I'm not going by number. I will randomly pick one person from 3 or one person from 10 or one person from 15, and based on that I will basically take the decision. So this is basically possible in the case when I'm experiencing that. Now I am a doctor. I know about the COVID-19 patient symptoms. I know in which country, in which state we can find COVID patients. So I will pick larger number of people from Delhi, lower number from Mumbai, or lower from Kerala, or larger from Karnataka. We know because we can find a more sample cases. So here what happened is completely based on my experience, judgment, I'm picking a sample from there. So that is how we have a two type of sampling, statistical and non-statistical. So non-statistical use the audit judgment to determine the method of sampling, the number of items that will be examined from the population sample size, which item to be select and which item to be ignore. The question is, once we basically pick the sample, what we going to do with that sample? So we basically, when we pick a sample, in that we check two things, test of control and test of details. Trust me, I literally struggled with this topic for the 1 year to understand the correlation of that. So based on my experience, I'm trying to correlating everything in this particular session. Once we basically pick a sample, in that sample, what we're going to check? Whether control is working or control is working effectively. Presence of a control in that sample. Okay. If it's there, whether it's working effectively or not. Example, I got a task. I need to check in the 1000 systems. Passwords are there. Yeah, test of control is called as a presence of a password policy. But I will try to create a random password with a less than character of the policy and see whether it's working effectively or not. So that is called as a compliance testing on the sample and substantive testing on the sample. That is why it is called as a compliance testing mean test of control, and substantive testing is test of detail. I repeat again, I pick from the 1000 systems, 100 systems as a sample. In that sample, I'm checking whether password policy there or not. That is a compliance in those 100 systems. If we identify, yes, they have a policy, I will try to create a less than 7 character policy, 8 character policy. See whether they can able to create the user with the less than 8 character or not. That is basically called as a substantive testing. But mostly compliance testing we follow in the IT, and substantive testing we basically follow in the financial transactions. They have a separation duty, that is a compliance testing as a control. But whether they fall in the separation duty correctly, we try to perform an artificial transaction, that is called as a substantive testing. So compliance testing, where the audit procedure designed to evaluate the operating effectiveness of a control in preventing or detecting or correcting the material weaknesses, whereas the substantive testing is an audit procedure designed to detect the material weakness at the assertion level. One example point is, compliance testing is an evidence gathering for the purpose of testing an organization compliance with the control procedure or not. So the difference from a substance testing, in which the evidence is gathered to evaluate the integrity of the individual transactions, data or other informations. One more important information is there is if compliance testing indicate we have a strong internal control, then substantive testing will be waived off. In case compliance testing indicate we have a weak internal control, then we can go for a substantive testing, more rigorous. As I said, in 100 I found only 10 or 15 system have a 8 character password. Now on those 8 system, I will try to create less than 8 character password and see whether it working effectively or not. So presence, absence and presence of a password policy is a compliance. But whether that password is able to follow effectively, we're trying to create a dummy password and see whether the password can accept with a less than 8 character password. That is basically called as a substantive testing. So first we perform a compliance, and then we basically go for the substantive testing. But the question is, how we basically drive this compliance and substantive testing? Whenever we basically pick sample, in the sample we basically check variables and all that. So we have a two primary method of sampling. One is called as a attribute sampling and one is basically called as a variable sampling. Data in the attribute form and the result either confirm or does not confirm, which is basically applied in the compliance testing. Okay, so attribute sampling, we basically map with the compliance sampling. And variable sampling is basically used as a deal with the population characteristics such as monetary value, okay, and provide the conclusion related to the deviation. Okay, You can see like variable sampling is all about checking how much, how good and how bad. Let's take one example. There's a company, okay? There's a company who basically manufacture about the premium glasswares, okay? There's a company who basically manufacture glasswares. Glassware. Okay, so the product is basically sold in 1,000 items. 1,000 items, okay? So the quality inspector randomly pick 100 samples. Okay, they basically pick 100 items. 100 items from each lot. Okay. If inspector find 2 or more broken or scratch item in the sample, the entire 100 item lot will be rejected. So this is basically called as an attribute. I repeat again, 100 item stock, we basically 100 item lot, lot, we have basically block. And in that, if I find 2 or more glass are broken, which is against the characteristics of the true quality, they will reject the entire lot. You have seen in the clothes factories and all that, right? Where you get a clothes in a very small price and very niche price, right? The branded clothes, because if they find 2 or minor 3 defects, they will basically reject the entire lot. So that is basically called as a attribute based sampling. Now, if you take an example of an automobile industry, in an automobile manufacturing plant, if you're checking where the car start in a first attempt, that is an attribute. But they claim that, okay, the car will able to provide 18 km per liter. So color or black is also attribute and shade of gray is also attribute. But whether can able to provide the defined mileage rate, we do the checking of that. So that is basically called as a variable sampling. Is it clear? What they claim, we will verify in the form of numbers. So this is how I'm talking about the variable data. So automobile manufacturing plant, if you're checking whether car start in a first attempt, you are collecting the attribute data. If you're measuring the mileage of the car per liter of a gasoline, what they commit, that is called as a variable data. That is why we say attribute sampling is basically used in a compliance testing, and variable sampling is basically used in a substantive testing. So let me summarize that again. First, we determine the audit objective. Then we have a population. Then we define the method by which we collect the sample. Then we calculate the sample size. Then we select the sample, in which we basically evaluate the sample by compliance and substantive testing by using a attribute and variable sampling methods. So this is all in the execution part of the first. Now the second part is basically called as audit evidence. Audit evidence. What you need to remember. So if I'm saying that, okay, this process is ineffective, it is always achieved through evidence only. But what is the true quality of an evidence? It must be sufficient, it must be relevant, and it must be competent evidence. Okay, so evidence must be sufficient, it must be relevant, it must be competent. Yes, the change management process is ineffective because in the SOP it is clearly mentioned that every RFC need to go through a 3-layer of check. I have a sample of RFC in which I could not find that. So I have a sample of the RFC which is sufficient to prove your process is ineffective. That is also relevant because you are the auditee is the one who provide me that particular sample, and it can basically prove my capability also. So evidence is any information used by an IS auditor to determine whether entity or data being audited follow the established criteria or objective and support the audit conclusion. It is a requirement that conclusion be based on the sufficient, relevant, competent evidence. So when you're planning any kind of IS audit, the type of audit evidence to be gathered, it use audit evidence to meet the audit objectives. But the question is, audit evidence, what is included in that? When we say audit evidence, may include what? Audit observations, results, materials, result of audit test procedures. So all those things are basically included in the audit evidence. The next part is called as a data analytics. For your information, data analytics is basically a part of the new syllabus of 2019 of a CISA. So IS auditor basically use data analytics for several reasons. The first is for the monitoring the key organization data for abnormal or variance. Definitely data analytics used for that reason only. For a layman term, data analytics is all about mining of data. I have a stored data For the audit, I need to pick a samples. In the samples, I need to extract the informations. I need to learn from the informations, how many transaction has been done. So all those things part of a data analytics. So we are using the data analytics same technique for the audit purpose. Example, out of 3,000 employees, 7 employees always mark attendance wrong. So from the data, with the help of analytics, we get a visibility, and then that information we can use as an evidence. So that is how the data analytics use in audits. So it basically determines the operational effectiveness of the current control. It determinations of the effectiveness of the anti-fraud procedures. It helped me to identify the business process errors. It basically identify to improve the business process. We can able to check the inefficiency in the business process. We can able to identify the frauds, identify all kind of exceptions, identifications of area where the poor data quality exists. All those things can be driven through the help of data analytics, and that is driven through a CAT, computer assist audit technique. I am an auditor. I have to depend upon some kind of an expertise to understand a particular state of information. But with the help of CAT based tool, I will get the data in my format, which I can able to read. I can able to present my opinions based on the fact. Where the computer tool is basically involved, application is involved for the audit analysis. That is basically called as a CAT, computer assist audit technique. So it is enable the IS auditor to gather information independently, and they provide the mean to gain access and analyze data for a predetermined audit objectives. Okay. So they provide the mean to gain access and analyze the data for the predetermined audit objectives and report the audit findings with the emphasis on the reliability of records produced and maintained in the system. So reliability of the source of the information used provide the reassurance on findings generated. So we have a different kind of a tool under the CAT. The first is basically process called as a continuous audit monitoring. As I said earlier, the tools are basically involved, which basically collect all kind of inefficiencies, and later on I can use those data for an audit purpose. So for that, I have to do the continuous monitoring, which is called as a CAM. Under the continuous audit monitoring, we have a several tools. The first one is basically called as a SCARF, System Control Audit Review File, and Embedded Audit Module. What is that? See, we have an application 1. We have an application 2. We have an application 3. Now in that we basically did some kind of a hooking. We embedded the EAM module, embedded audit module. So any kind of activity happen in the application, it immediately provide the alert on the one system interface. It is a time consuming and difficult to use. Okay. It's a time consuming, difficult to use, but less so if incorporated when the programs are developed. It can be done. So if you're having an in-house development, you have access to source code, you can able to hook your plugins into the application. Okay. So involved inactive account. So what we can do, so data recorded in there is a file will created by this hook, which is called as a SCAR file. Okay. And data recorded in SCAR file or audit include the transaction which exceed the specific dollar limit. So we are basically integrating this SCARF in our ERP application. Any transaction which is exceed by $10 million, we have set the criteria, it must be recorded. So that can be automatically immediately report in the SCAR file. It can basically involve the inactive accounts, any kind of activity which has happened, deviate from the company policy. All those things can be updated in the SCAR file. The second is called as a snapshot. So snapshot is an audit module in the program which record the transactions and their master file record before and after processing. Any question in the exam talking about comparison between the previous transaction and new transaction, answer is snapshot. Any question in the exam talking about transaction and master file record, answer is snapshot. Any question talking about the selected data are recorded in a special file and reviewed by the auditor to verify all processing steps has been properly executed, answer is basically snapshot, because snapshot used to compare between the previous transactions and other transaction. Third is basically called as a audit hooks. Audit hooks, any question talking about flag suspicious transaction, flag, F-L-A-G, flag suspicious transaction, flag suspicious transaction. Okay, example like insurance company. So insurance company looking for a policy holder who change their name or address, then subsequently withdraw the fund. It is so automatically raise the alert for that. Okay, accounts team basically processing the payment without separation duty. So audit hook will basically record that. So audit hook are the audit routine that flags suspicious transactions. We can also automate that. And the last is called as ITF, sorry, second last, ITF, which processing the test transaction to update the dummy records. So any question in the exam talking about using a dummy records to validate the controls, that is called as ITF, integrated test facility. We are not using actual record, we are using a dummy transaction and seeing whether control are working effectively or not. Example, in the change management, we have a ServiceNow tool. Through that, I'm trying to approve some kind of RFC applications, and I'm trying to see whether applications get approved without a service manager. In the ERP application, I'm checking whether funds can be withdrawn without the separation duty. So I'm basically performing some kind of an artificial transaction to see the effectiveness. Mostly we use in our financial sectors. Next is basically called as a CIS. CIF, continuous intermittent simulation. Any question in the exam talking about the database level. Okay, this module actually examine all the transactions that update in the DBMS. So any question talking about DBMS and monitoring the transaction in the DBMS, exclusive we have a plugin for the DBMS. Is it clear? Which is an alternate of the SCARF. SCARF we use for the application transactions, whereas the CIS use exclusively in the DBMS. So summary is very important. It basically monitor the transaction SCARF and record in this file. Snapshot is basically to the comparison. Audit hook look for the flags. ITF dummy transaction. CIS an alternate of a SCARF used in the database. The next part is basically called as a reporting and communication technique. See, audit findings should be reported and communicated to stakeholder. That is a true quality of an auditor. Okay, with the appropriate buy-in from the auditee. It doesn't mean okay you complete the report and you directly send to the board. No. Suppose you are my auditee. I did an audit for your particular process. So it is my responsibility to get your acceptance on the report, because you are the one who going to prepare the action plan. Example, if I identify policies ineffective, you need to provide me the action plan by when you're going to implement the policy. Actual audit activity happened during that time when we need to convince the auditee on their findings. First of all, you discover the flaw in their process. Okay. First of all, you discover the flaw in their process, and later on what happen, you challenging those things to the senior management, which also creates some kind of a negative impact in the auditee mind. So one of the painful tasks for any auditor is to get the buy-in from the auditee on those findings. Also, you need to do the follow-ups to close those findings also to get it done from the auditee. So it is very important for you to make sure they have a proper buy-in from the auditee. Okay, and then present the complete detailed report to the senior management. This is how the audit process can be successful. It is very important to communicate the audit results. Okay, we also have a audit report objectives. But one thing which I want to discuss in the audit results, see, during an exit interview, we need to ensure IS auditor will basically present the facts, and those facts, whatever they're presenting, it must be correct. Okay, and it must be materialized. And how we basically validate with the help of evidence. Okay, we need to ensure the recommendations are realistic, cost effective. If not, seek the alternative through a negotiation with the auditee management. Recommend implementation date of agreed on recommendation and do the follow-up on those particular dates. Okay, so IS auditor should be aware that ultimately they are responsible to senior management and audit committee. So they should feel free to communicate issues or concern to these groups. So tomorrow, if auditee has denied, no, I'm not going to submit this finding, I'm not going to correct that. Okay, you don't need to fight. You can just raise your concern to your audit committee. They will basically spoke to the concerned person. Example, like you doing an audit of the change management. You went to the change management service manager and present their findings and all that. They are not agree on that. It is okay. You can go to the audit committee and let them handle to the board. And based on that, they basically get it done from the senior management. You cannot directly do any kind of a fight. We can basically approach our audit committee in several cases. This is also testable in the exam. When in one condition, when the auditee is not agreed on the findings, they are not reluctant to implement any kind of a controls. Even after doing the follow-ups, we complete the audits and raise the concern about the data findings need to be closed. They are not closed that. So in all three cases, you can go to the audit committees. Okay. So any attempt to deny access by level lower than senior management would limit the independence of an audit function. That is why internal audit in the organization directly report to the board. Next is basically called as the audit report objectives. So IS audit specific reporting objectives are developed based on the report requirement from the auditing management. One thing is that always remember audit report is always based on the audience. Audit report is always based on audience language. Okay. So, and make sure it should be fully compliant. Next is called as an audit report structure and content. So audit report are the end product of the IS audit work. So exact format of the audit report will be vary by the organization. However, IS auditor should understand the basic component of an audit report, how it communicates audit findings to the management that we need to decide. So auditee management evaluate the findings, corrective action to be taken, and timing for implementation need to be defined that. Management may not be able to implement all the audit recommendation immediately. That is why they ask for the buy-in times and all. One more important thing is the IS auditor should discuss the recommendations and any planned implementation date while in a process of releasing the audit report. Okay, that is another thing we need to consider. Next part is called as a audit documentation. So audit documentation is a written record that provides the support for the representation in the audit report. It should demonstrate the engagement compiled with the standard and also support the basis for the audit conclusion. It is also recommended the documentation includes your copy of the report and evidence support review. Next, once the audit is completed, we have to do follow-up. Example, you as an auditor said that, okay, I'm going to close this finding in February. I have to do the follow-up in the February with the evidence. I need to justify whether findings has been closed or not. So auditing is always an ongoing process from the follow-up point of view. IS auditor is not an effective if audit are performed and report issued, but no follow-up is conducted to determine whether management has taken the appropriate corrective action. So it is very important to do the follow-ups to make sure they have closed those findings. We basically has a different type of IS reports. So IS report is driven mainly by the type of audit engagement and reporting requirement from the IS audit and assurance standard. Okay. So these are basically things we have when you're going to communicate the reports, the results. The last part is basically called as a quality assurance and improvement of audit process. So one thing is there, CSA is there. It is quite testable in the exam, CSA. So auditor play an important role in improving the quality and control of information system in the organization. And element of a quality control with respect to audit engagement is include the leadership responsibility, ethical requirement, acceptance, assignment of engagement team, engagement performance, resolution of different opinions. So these are basically the true quality which is basically used to improve the audit process. Another important thing is called as a CSA, very, very important for the CISA exam. CSA is an assessment of a control made by the staff and management of the unit. Okay. So objective of the CSA is to leverage the internal audit function by shifting some of the control. Now what happens is internal auditor comes every year and do the audit for a one particular times. Example, January we did one audit. We basically implement the control for January reason only. Same like, when we face any kind of a PCI DSS audit, the control is only effective for that particular month. Once the auditor goes, you will change the control accordingly. So it does not give any kind of an assurance. If you want a continuous assessment to be done, you can have a CSA. Now example, like after security awareness training, we raise the questionnaire to see how effective was the training. What is the response ratio? Phishing campaign we do, that is also CSA only. When you file your appraisal and all that, that is called as a self-assessment, where you basically explain about what are your achievements you did in last 1 year. That is also self-assessment. So we do this kind of an activity on a regular basis to make sure our controls are working effectively, because we as a human follow the administrative function. That is a kind of a control for us. That is why CSA play a very important role. So what is the benefit of CSA? Primary benefit is early detection of a risk. January we did the audit, for an entire year we worked. Again next year in January we came for an audit, we identify some high risk. There's no point. Might be company might face some kind of a compliance issue. So early detection of a risk you want, you can go for a CSA. And more efficient and improved internal control we have. Disadvantage is that in some cases they will consider this as an audit also. Okay, what is the role of an auditor in the CSA is he will be act like a facilitator. Okay. We also have an integrated audit. Your financial audit are mostly integrated audit where we audit the financial statement, which is hosting on IT. We do the IT audits also, and it is driven by quality. We do quality process audit also. That is called as an integrated audit, and that is considered as an effective audit also. So this is all in this particular domain. I will try to cover the domain 2 in next 2 weeks, and keep subscribe my YouTube channel for more updates. My name is Prab Nair. Thank you so much.